You can go ahead.
Yes. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the 12th Sunday webinar series brought to you by the Indian Scientist Response to COVID-19. That's ISRC. ISRC is a voluntary group of 500 plus scientists, engineers, technologists, doctors, public health researchers, science communicators, journalists, and students who've come together to respond to the pandemic and create awareness about its science to the public. In our Sunday webinars too, we focus on inviting one of these experts to just talk about how things have changed in their work as well as things around us because of COVID-19. I am Spurti Raman, a science communicator currently working as the managing editor at Research Matters. So I will be your moderator today, and I will start with a small anecdote, so to say. In March, when the pandemic had just started to raise its ugly head, a small group of science communicators at ISRC put together a few documents, posters, graphics, stories, and videos to inform the public about the science behind the virus, the illness, the disease, so to say, of COVID-19 and how that affects our daily lives. While that is one small channel of outreach to reach, to pass the message on to the public, a big bang intersection between the public and the newsmakers, so to say, in this case, the pandemic, happens to be our journalists. So journalists are going to kind of bridge the information gap between the public and who has information, so to say. With that note, I'm excited to introduce you all to our speaker for the day, Ms. Ramya Kannan, Chief of Bureau, Tamil Nadu for the Hindu, one of the country's most reputed newspapers. Ramya, thank you for joining us and accepting our invite to talk to us today.
Thank you, Spurti. Thanks for having me over. It's quite a shock initially, as I said, but let's hope this sort of makes sense to you and to us and to you. I mean, both scientists as well as journalists. And it's a rainy day in Chennai today, and it's not hot, hotter and hottest. So let me start. I'm going to try and share a presentation. It's just for you to keep your eyes on the screen, but I'm going to be doing the talking basically. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ramya. So over to you, then you can start.
Able to see my presentation? Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Right.
Maybe we can put it on the presentation mode because right now it's not.
Yeah. So yes, I'm going to talk about journalism in the time of COVID-19 and particularly reporting because I'm a reporter. I've been a reporter for over 23 years now. And in all this while, there's been nothing quite like COVID. I've seen some disasters, some epidemics, all kinds of things really. The death of 2 chief ministers, but the tsunami, and I've still not seen anything of the scale and the sheer expanse of this COVID. So yes, it's few. Reporting in the time of COVID does bring with it certain issues. So when COVID struck, basically by mid-March or so, we were not, we were taking it cool in the newsrooms and we didn't really know how big an issue this was going to be. And slowly over a period of time, especially after lockdown, it struck us that our usual tools, the tools of our trade, are probably not going to help us anymore. Traditionally, we've emphasized and perhaps overemphasized field reporting, spot reporting. The whole idea we've sort of ridden on is being there while it happens, or at least getting there as soon as possible. So with COVID, this is suddenly such a risky thing to do. And, it was like the carpet was yanked out from under our feet. And that sort of, for a while, we sort of, struggled to do the things that we usually do and we regularly do. And with the lockdown, though newspapers were allowed to function because we were essential service, we also had to take precautions in newsrooms in order to ensure that our members didn't fall sick and didn't transmit the virus. Because then, more than now, we had very little clue about what this virus was all about. So we had to innovate, we had to think hard, we had to think on our feet, and we have to innovate. We decided on alternate teams. I think most offices are now functioning, newspaper offices, media houses are functioning on a 2 or 3 member team, basically, that comes in on alternate days and that doesn't meet each other, so that if one member of the team has COVID, then transmission is restricted and the business as usual is possible with the remaining teams. So when it comes to reporting, we went from insisting that our members, our reporters visit the spot, to actually cautioning them about stepping into areas that are newsworthy. So in a pandemic, what are the areas that are going to be newsworthy? These are areas that have to do with the pandemic, that have to do with COVID. These are hospitals and COVID care centers, and these are homes of people, these are marketplaces, these are bus stands, the usual spots that we go. And we were telling our reporters, look, be careful, avoid going to the spot if you can do that. But then you can't always do that. There is always an element of risk when you step out, and then we have to be absolutely careful when it is necessary to step out. So the practical difficulties were, how, like I said, we changed the way we do journalism, and we used to prowling the corridors of hospitals and smoking out documents, having a cup of chai or samosa with the staff, with hospital staff, or, deputy secretaries who sneak out the documents to you. Like, during normal times, these are great sources. These are the people who give you the news. But guess what? It's not possible anymore. You can't just walk into a government office. One, the government office is probably empty because people haven't been coming into work. It's probably sparsely populated. And before that, the security at the gate is not going to let you in. People who were lax about, entry, institutions that were lax about allowing people in have now tightened, with valid reason, of course. But that's kind of shut off our sources, and people don't have access to documents as they usually do, even the people who want to help you. So we already realized that, we have to step out sometimes. It's not possible to sit in office and do news. It's just not on. So some companies provided PPEs, minimal at times. It's just masks and gloves and sanitizers. Some did not. So the reporters were left to their own devices. The reporters who went out were asked not to come back to office because of the risk of transmission, basically, but file or send their copies or P2Cs from remote locations. There are several innovations. There was one news channel in Tamil Nadu that asked its reporters to hand over their hard drives at the front desk, and leave if they came back from the field. So usually reporters, as a part of their task, they rush towards harm. This is the nature of the beast. Where people, in a disaster, we're running, in a tsunami, we're running towards the waves, and in COVID, we're running towards the beast, which is the virus. So in going out and reporting their stories. Naturally, a number of reporters have tested positive and they've had to go to hospital or COVID care centers. Some of them have been very ill, a couple of friends of mine, but they've also managed to bounce back and they are back at work again. So I'd like to share, something that happened in an informal webinar of women journalists covering COVID in Tamil Nadu. A group of largely women Tamil journalists covering the pandemic. They had some very interesting insights. Sorry about that typo there. These women who were at this webinar were mostly young with a few years of experience in the field and, sort of junior staff. Almost all of them were reporters. A few production and desk staff were there as well, and they had some really interesting things to say. They were trapped in these situations without any sort of opportunity to resolve their grievances, and they were wondering if we could do anything about it. So channels insisted that the news reporter cover the story in person, including in hospitals and COVID wards. And naturally, these reporters are perturbed about possible exposure. Very worried about this, especially after a bunch of journalists tested positive in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, and in some of the districts. They devised a way of sharing content. So they said, okay, if you go here, then you shoot the visuals and you share it with us. In few of the districts, a very ingenious method of sharing content, but unfortunately that didn't work for long. They started, the channels, the bosses started saying, we need exclusive content. I need exclusive footage. I don't need the footage that the other channel is running as well. And so they had to get back onto the field and they had to put themselves at great risk while shooting for their channels. Newspapers that way have I think by and large managed to avoid unnecessary exposure. Of course, our reporters go out too, but we don't need the visuals, which is very important to channels. So social distancing is a big problem. I just put this image here recently from a press conference in Chennai. I'm not sure if you can see it, but just look at that. Just what kind of social distancing is there? I mean, this is possibly a cluster formation, if you ask me. And whether it's the men in white there are all ministers. Couple of days after, one of these ministers tested positive, and his family soon after. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth about who must have where he might have caught the infection from. But I think that it really does not matter. In a situation like this, anyone can give anyone COVID. The possibilities of transmission are very high. And this is the reality in most places today. This is the reality because most governments refuse to cooperate. I mean, we had this prolonged interaction with the state government to see whether the DIPR, the Local Information and Publicity Department, would share feeds of the press conferences that the governments had, the ministers or whatever had. And I think we managed to sort of ensure that there was spacing at the venue itself, and some press conferences were transmitted live. But you see, once the lockdowns were over, then people got into regular mode and they were happy, you know, covering press conferences as usual. So social distancing is a huge issue for us, and work from home. There are a huge bunch of issues for women journalists mostly, and it's tough to work from home. It's not easy to work from home at all. So on the flip side, and this is something I was discussing with Spurti and Ritika just before this started. On the flip side, I've been reporting on health and science for some years now. And for me, like a scientist friend of mine said, this is the revenge of science, as it were, the revenge of the nerds, actually, he said. Whether people like it or not, here we are discussing issues relating to science, medicine, Virology, I mean, who would have thought that randomized controlled trials would be the topic at the water cooler? It is the topic at the water cooler. It is on all news pages, it's on primetime television. And it's sort of elevate. I mean, if you are talking science at such at such frequencies, then the level of discourse has been elevated in this country. um, it's not just about politics. There is a lot of politics in science. I'm not saying there isn't, but then we are talking about issues that we've never spoken about. Randomized controlled trials, or latency of virus, or whether remdesivir works over a hydroxychloroquine. So it seems insensitive to say this, but it really is a very heady time to be reporting on science. There are so many pages available for you. It doesn't matter if the content is all science. I mean, page 1 to page 24, like I mean, what other point of time in history have we covered science so much and so well? So there are, it's a very heady time. And I don't want to say this once more because it seems insensitive too, but it's true. There are challenges though. Using the traditional means of practicing journalism is not possible anymore. Like I said in the beginning, it's not possible anymore. The tools we've taken for granted, the tools that have helped us over the years, it's not helping us anymore. Our usual sources have, I don't know, they're not at work, or they can't share information. And we've had to innovate, we've had to find other sources, we've had to revise our strategies, as it were. I guess a lot of us are doing it wherever we are at workplaces. And the only thing is that news is daily business, reporting is daily business, and we have to be pretty much on the ball as we do it. I mean, there is no lag possible. At least newspapers are slightly better off, though we are also going web first and looking at coverage online. But for television channels, it's pretty much on the ball, right? So that's a challenge because we have to do things differently. So
Ramya,
now, um,
sorry to interrupt you. Can you just block the annotations so that your screen is kind of visible? There's some,
yeah,
some annotation out there on the slides.
1 second. Just, I'm not able to see. Let me share it again. Let's see if
Sure.
there's.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I've moved one slide ahead. So, okay, 1 second.
On the top, there is an option you can disable annotation.
I think it's not. Is that okay now? Yeah.
It's okay now. If you can do that, disable the annotation so that it won't happen again.
Annotate. Format. All right. Okay, I'm going to take my hands off the screen, so that might help. So finding the right sources for our subjects, we have to, we've really scurried to find immunologists and vaccinologists and epidemiologists. And for some of us who care to make this, a gender neutral or gender fair, we look for women panelists, and there are challenges there. One, these people are all extremely busy, as they've probably never been before. I mean, they're all doing really hard work. And I know doctors who have stayed in hospital for weeks on end, not even going home. And I can't crib that they haven't called me back, in 2 days or 3 days. I mean, this is not their priority. I understand it, but then I have a job to do as well. It makes my job tougher to do. Just to quote Apurva Mandavali, who reports on medicine for the NYT, recorded recently on Twitter that it was for a particular story. She gave some figures in, I'm sure you'll get it off her feed, that she found it really difficult to speak to women professionals who also have a home to run. And let me record at this point that me and my team, we have great appreciation, the greatest appreciation for people who do continue to speak to us despite their tremendous load at work and at home. There are certain groups of people that are working really hard, and they're all in science and they're in medicine, and they're looking after patients, and they're looking after healthcare workers. They're coming and checking your temperature at home. They're recording everything. We are really grateful to people who continue to talk to us, though it's really difficult for them to do so. But you know what? The pace of development has really moved fast, in a manner that we feel is nearly alien. It's frenetic, especially news regarding COVID. I mean, we have to keep up, and it's a tough ask. And some of us have also other beats to cover, other tasks to do. And we find ourselves increasingly reading more and discussing more, and being in like 100 webinars, trying to gain more information, trying to get the latest, because things are evolving so fast. We also need to get information fast, and there's a lot of news happening on COVID. This is a global pandemic. Information is coming at us from all sides. I mean, there's a drought. There are days when we've complained of drought of news. That's no longer true. There's information coming from all sides. And we have to work really hard to keep up. There are more data stories now because there is a lot of data available again. Like this news, there's a surfeit of data. The questions we have to ask are, do we have the skills for interpretation? I've always said that you can pick raw data and interpret it to say just what you want to say, and that might be different from what, say, person B wants to say, and it will serve the purpose. These are issues that we're also looking at in newsrooms, whether we need to reskill our employees, our colleagues, whether these are the skills we need. Do we really need to sort of diversify our skill sets in order to face the world that's COVID, that's COVID, that has a pandemic, that's COVID-19. So when working for news channels or pushing news for papers, there is a deadline. We don't like it, but there is a deadline, and it's very real. You don't have as much time as you would like to work on a story, especially when the developments are so fast-paced. Catching hold of a source when you have just 2 or 3, something broke at 5:30, and you need to look at it from a point of view of a newspaper. You need it in maybe 3 hours or 4 hours. How do you catch hold of sources who've probably not even heard of this development, and communicate the development to them, and then allow them to sort of cogitate and get back to us on that? It's tough. We need to push out a good story in the 2 or 3 hours that is available to us. And sometimes I wonder if that's the right thing to do, but then that's the thing we have to do. That's the job we are in. Of course, newspapers and other channels have explainers these days, where sort of more lengthy, long-form journalism is possible on scientific issues as well, and some of us are grateful for it. So pre-pub, honestly, there are days when we would never even look at pre-pub articles. I mean, it was anathema. It was not, I mean, content that was not published on a peer-reviewed journal would never find a place in our newspapers. But now we don't have that luxury, do we? I mean, I still have huge doubts about whether I need to take a pre-pub article or not. I did a course with Dr. Madhukar Pai of the McGill University in Montreal on epidemiology for journalists. And this was one of the areas that he focused on. And what do we report when there's so much information coming in? Do we wait for randomized controlled trials? Do we wait for publications in peer-reviewed journals? Or do we just go with a pre-pub? So we get it, but sometimes when you have to explain, we'd rather wait for peer-reviewed publications. But sometimes you have to explain to editors why, when all the other newspapers are carrying a story, you'd still like to wait. That's not a very nice position to be in, believe me. the other thing is that the battle with fake news just got that much harder. You know, I know there are websites like Alt News and India Spend that do a lot of fake news busting when it comes to general news, but there's still a lot of claims on cures and magical treatments and home remedies touted as being effective on WhatsApp. Um, and some of it can be really, really harmful. And as journalists, we are information to our people as well. And to bust fake news, that takes a lot of time and energy, especially if you're doing something else as well at the time. And but we have to do it. Again, it's not an option. We need to bust fake news because there is a lot of it happening here, and it's necessary to set the science right from time to time in whatever way we think is possible. So there is also a concern that is dominating news organizations at this time, and that's dwindling revenues. It's not the best time for ads, placing ads, which is probably the biggest source of revenue for newspaper companies. They get some money from subscription, um, and channels also get some money from subscription, but the mainstay continues to be ad revenues. And they are fluctuating, they're dwindling. And that's going to take some time to overcome. As a result, we also see leaner newsrooms. One is because of the inability to hold on to staff, perhaps because of dwindling revenues. Also, fewer people in the newsroom in order, like I said earlier, in order to cut transmission. So we're working with fewer resources. And that's another challenge as well. So if I made it seem like it's all challenge and no fun, that's not true. We still enjoy what we do, and that's how we're doing this continuously. And we appreciate, like Spurti said in the beginning, we appreciate these bridges between scientists and journalists all the time. When I speak to a mixed group, I'm always saying that we need to be friends. We're not adversaries, and and you are experts in your field, but then there's a bit of intervention sometimes required to take in news to the common people. So that's what we do, and we do it even in the time of COVID-19. And that's pretty much what I have to say. I mean, if there are questions, we could take that forward, but that's as much. Thank you so much for listening so patiently to my rants and everything else. I really enjoyed doing this. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the share, okay?
Thank you so much for presenting your point of view, so to say, and also the challenges that happens on the other side of news that we don't get to see. We only see what the news is already produced, right? I mean, we don't know what is happening in the newsroom as audience. So thank you so much for sharing that bit and enlightening us about the challenges that you face, and especially with the pandemic here. So you did mention a very interesting point at the end, saying that you would appreciate bridges like this between scientists and media. And you also gave an excellent example of Dr. Pai's class that happened like a couple of months ago. That's where you really start to talk and get from a journalist standpoint what is the knowledge that is needed to evaluate what is the accurate measure of science versus what is with the information overflow that seems to be there. So with that, okay, we do know Dr. Pai is in Montreal, not in India, and we do have a bunch of talented scientists in India. So, and we are talking at a forum where there are a lot of scientists here again. So I just wanted to open up with one question in terms of how would you like scientists in India talk to the media, considering there is a pandemic, considering that you need experts to talk to? one, and the other thing obviously is to get information that not everybody, not every journalist is a science journalist. So how do you like really, you know, balance it out to get the most of the situation right here?
Yeah. So yeah, that's like really interesting. Doing these webinars, I think, is a great idea. I've done a few others since then, including the WHO webinars, because you see, if this was normal time, we'd have like a hajar, workshops on COVID-19, because this is the next HIV. I mean, it's bigger than HIV, but I'm thinking that there'll be a lot of workshops. So that is not possible right now. So webinars are a great tool. Um, I think if there is at some point of time an opportunity to share it with journalists, um, you know, uh, seek their interest in WhatsApp groups, maybe, because WhatsApp's become like the tool of the future. I mean, we're living the future. So that would be wonderful if we had Indian scientists to give us webinars. I mean, it can also be a small sort of webinar again. It could be a single, it could be a series or a single event on a particular topic. In fact, you're right, Spurti. There are a lot of non-science journalists who've been hustled into covering COVID now, and they're managing pretty well, but they could do with some help on the side as well. So yes, this is a great idea, and do let us know if there are some webinars that you guys can organize.
Yeah, so at that point, I just want to mention that the WhatsApp group kind of exists already. Now that I have your number, I will add you all and, just circulate that around. But yes, so that is the first level is already there. And I think it's a great pointer to note that journalists per se would also appreciate webinars held by scientists to kind of, put their thoughts across different developments that's coming in. The other question I have for you is with respect to the fast evolving science and the way it is, changing every single day. Or we say drug ABC works today, and tomorrow there is a lot of, noise around it saying that it doesn't work. Clinical trials show you different, results when it is performed on different set of people, and then there's so much confusion even in messaging that right out to the public, right? Because they will come back to you and say, okay, you said this the other day, but why are you saying this? So there is a lot of confusion that's going on. There is uncertainty for everybody. In this times of uncertainty, what do you think the journalists can do in, to kind of get the confidence and the trust of the public, because that's important for them to believe in what you say?
Right. So, yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's something that we're all thinking about as well. The thing is that everything you said is the nature of the beast, because of what little we know about COVID and how quickly that knowledge is evolving. It's changing on a day, I mean, on an hour by hour basis. We find it really difficult to even figures. For instance, if you give positive figures and by the next morning they're like, way off the mark. So data, all kinds of data, for instance, it's not static. Everything is a rolling average these days. So we're finding it difficult to to be up to date, which is what we'd like to be. So but I think there is an understanding in the world also that this is how it is, that there is a lot of developments happening on a day by day basis, on an hour to hour basis. And so how we try to protect ourselves is to say that it happened as on. So this is the development, as on this particular time or date or whatever. And we try to be as current as possible given our deadline. So if we have a story by, a Friday night story, then if we have until 8:30 to do the story, then until 8:30 we follow the whatever latest is there in the field. These are way. I mean, it's not ideal, but these are ways in which we try to handle the. We've figured out how to handle the uncertainties of this situation.
I have a related question here from one of our viewers, Ramya, in terms of, the uncertainty and the lack of data, so to say. And there is also a big contribution from the administration, unfortunately, to also this opacity, right? We
Yeah,
don't,
absolutely.
I mean, journalists do not get the kind of data that you're seeking out. You need to really wrestle your arm into, getting it. So with administrations also quoting different numbers, different data based on whatever ways of calculation that they have, how do you retain the thread of a story and communicate in a manner that helps the public and also show that there is, someone else to blame because they need to overp responsibility, so to say?
Right. That's a fair point, actually. So we try and insist wherever possible on raw data. So um, uh, as an organization and personally also, we've insisted, you just give me the raw data. You don't have to do the percentages. You don't have to do the interpretation. We can do a certain amount of interpretation with the knowledge we have, of course, in consultation with some experts in the field. I think raw data put on a public platform is at the heart of this. I mean, if we want to break that opacity that you rightly pointed out too, I think to put raw data on an open source platform is very important. So, in fact, I had one official ask me, when I asked him for, some data, he's like, I said, put it on an open platform, put it on your COVID platform. And he's like, madam, but then every journalist will get it. No, you won't have exclusivity. I was like, that's not your problem. Just put raw data there. We'll do whatever we have to ourselves. So I think that is the only solution as far as possible. And of course, we have to be careful with the kind of interpretations we do. It's, it's ripe. The data, so much data is there. So we have to be careful with that. Best is to check with some experts in the field if this is the path. I mean, they can't check every figure you're putting down, but they can check whether the trajectory you're proceeding on is right or not. So I think that, yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think there's another question on the slides you presented. You did mention saying that this is the revenge of science, in terms of, how much science journalism is gaining prominence these days. So does that suggest that science journalism will get more prominence in times to come?
I think so. Yes. I think health and science journalism have come to stay, just as maybe geopolitics or India-China relations. I think it's sort of built a platform for science journalists, unwittingly, of course. But then we have this platform, and I think we should push on with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And related to that, do you think with the kind of science reporting that we should be having, considering there is going to be COVID in the next whatever, few months, few years, whatever, and then there are going to be more considering the climate change and the impacts of all these things, is Indian talent pool among journalists, do we have enough science journalists that can really do justice to whatever is happening in this landscape? What is your take on that?
Yeah. I think the other thing that I was saying, reskilling is also important. There are people with a aptitude. So there are two things you need, actually, I think, when you write on science. One, you have to be interested, and two, you should have an aptitude. Because I have seen people write copies that are so turgid. I mean, it's like journalists write copies that are so turgid because they don't want to clarify. And the basis of writing science is to ensure that the common man understands what you write as well. You say it in a manner that will. But there are a lot of interest has picked up, for sure. Interest among journalists has picked up. There are a lot of journalists who are doing other things in politics mainly have also started writing on COVID. Aptitude, I think some of them do have an aptitude as well, because journalists are glorious generalists. They can do one thing today and another thing tomorrow and be actually happy with both the events they cover. Reskilling sometimes I think might be significant if we were to face by organizations, because journalists sometimes are not motivated or they don't have the time, frankly, to go on to webinars. So organizations to facilitate participation in webinars, science webinars, or orientation programs, I think that will make a lot of difference.
Yeah, and another question related to that is, I'm not talking about publications like the Hindu, which is doing a fantastic job in covering COVID-19, but I'm just talking about small publications who may not have the right talent or skill, but they still have to be in the job, right? In the sense they still have to run their newsrooms and cover things. The pitfall in that sense for these small media houses is that you don't have enough skilled journalists who understand what is the fast evolving science that's behind the pandemic, and as a result there is going to be hyper sensationalism and false reporting, misreporting, and things like that. So as a journalist, why do you think this is happening? Is it just lack of skill, or do you think here is where scientists in the country can really pitch in and help make reporting better?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of everything there. There's a bit of desire to be sensational. I think that's innate with some media. That's the way they are wired. That's their DNA, to try and be sensational because they think that that kind of news sells. But I think some of them have sort of gone down the sensational path for a really long while for them to adjust now, and so they seek out the sensational. But I think the involvement of scientists, especially scientists who are conversant in regional languages, not just English, but Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada or Bengali or Hindi or whatever language. It would be great if they were able to give inputs, or nudge a journalist in the right direction. Maybe these journalists, usually what happens is a journalist gets in touch with a scientist for clarification, but I think it could also be the other way. The scientists can also approach the journalist. I mean, it is being done, I'm not saying, but the norm is usually the journalist making overtures. But I think the other side should also be activated, like scientists seeking out journalists and seeing if they can help in any way. Your WhatsApp group that you spoke about, I think that's a great starting place. And if references can be made to experts. So for instance, if there's a lot of talk about the vaccine now. So if you could indicate that, say, Dr. XYZ is an expert vaccinologist and can speak in Malayalam, Tamil, and Telugu, then that information can be shared with journalists and probably give that journalist also an opportunity to get the right picture in. But there will be it's perennial. I think as long as journalism exists, there will be a desire to go after the sensational. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just a bit of self-promotion from the ISRC standpoint. We just did a webinar last Friday in Kannada. So basically talking about
great.
All the advancements that's happened in the last 3 months in terms of science in Kannada, and journalists were specially invited. Unfortunately, not many turned up, but then steps are taken. So
yeah,
maybe
awesome.
If there are journalists here, I would say please tune into ISRC and kind of get to know about it.
Sure,
Let's moving on. The other question is, you did also mention saying that now the newsrooms are running on a shoestring budget. There aren't revenues coming in because ads are really dwindling. So there have been like offline rumors that there are a lot of employees that have been fired in big newspapers. Is that, how serious is that problem, and what would you have to say about it?
Right, this puts me in the spot. Yes, I think even major newspapers are retrenching now, and that's very sad. It sort of breaks my heart every time someone has to be let go. And even news organizations are doing it with a very heavy heart, and it's not the ideal of circumstances. I think even I'm not management, so But I do realize, at least with the Hindu, that there is a great deal of unhappiness that this is happening, even among those who are forced to do this. But I think that the situation is really dire in terms of revenues and being able to continue, even in large news organizations. What would you think? The behemoths or mammoth organizations are also feeling the brunt. Even before COVID struck, there was concern with dwindling subscriptions, people migrating online and, you know, or moving to OTT content on Netflix and Prime and not going in for news. So I think there was a concern even before this started about revenues for news organizations. And well, we haven't figured it out yet. But I think this is a compulsion. People are not doing it happily. They're doing it because I think they're forced to. I mean, I'm not speaking for the management, but from where I see, from where I sit, this is what I can see. Of course, talking about the Hindu, but other organizations as well, I'm sure, share the same concerns and issues.
There's another question regarding this. Do you think now the time is ripe for citizen journalism? So, because there are going to be, as you mentioned, these challenges of revenue. So, do you think time is ripe for it? Are media houses in India ready for something like that?
I think Indian media has successfully used citizen journalism for civic issues so far. Citizen journalism has had a fairly successful run across the country with regard to civic issues.
Right.
So it remains to be seen. Of course, there is an opportunity for it. I mean, its success with civic issues has shown that it could probably be used in other segments as well. Science, I'm not sure. Maybe if it's a scientist or someone else who has solid knowledge and we can rely and trust, the news organization can rely and trust. I think that might work at some point, but we need to be sure that the person knows what they're talking about. It's easy to say with civic journalism. It's easy to say about bad roads and street lights. Slightly more tough with science. So, but I'm sure if scientists or people who known in their field for what they do, if they do continue to make these short videos, I'm sure they have a place in the future of journalism in this country, or even globally. Yeah.
Thank you. There's another question from Facebook coming in asking, what are the systems within India for journalists to understand science, including some basics of social science?
So, like I said, journalism, like my boss used to say, journalists are glorious generalists. So, today you might be asked to cover, gold prices of gold in Chennai. Tomorrow you might have to cover something on marine fishing in the Gulf of Mannar. So we have to do this. I mean, there's no cribbing about it. It's just got to do what we got to do. But if you wish to specialize and look around, there are indeed options. In fact, I know of, health journalism courses as well in a couple of places. There are NGOs who run data analysis workshops, and there are NGOs who do mental health reporting. They give you guidance on mental health reporting, and that's the best part. I mean, it's compared to when I started off, and we were pretty much on our own and no Google as well. There was Google, but not as common as now. It's far easier to get help today to specialize in a particular field as a journalist than it was in the past. And I think that's good. That's really good. And then there are webinars as well. So I think it's possible, like your CME programs, it's possible to do a continuing journalism education. If you are in the mood for it and if you're willing to do it, I think it's possible to enhance your skills that way.
So it's mostly motivated by what an individual wants.
Yeah, I think so. But I think some organizations, there's VANIFRA and some other organizations that work with journalists to improve um, basically all-round development of journalists. So they do offer specific course and might be expensive, and it's mostly it depends on the organization to pick it or not, but they do offer some specialized courses as well that do help. They give you practical tips on how to do things.
The other question that's coming in is, you are a health reporter, health journalist. So how strong is the influence of the corporate sector on health journalism at the moment in India?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I did a sort of a podcast with Dr. Sundaraman and with people from Jan Swasthya Abhiyan. And what we did speak about is that there was a great deal of private sector operations in healthcare in India, particularly in the southern states. A great deal of corporate healthcare happening, and there were times when there would be like 3 or 4 press conferences from private hospitals, basically talking about we first, me first, he first, she first, and then COVID happened, and well, we don't know where these private hospitals went. At least in the initial stage of the epidemic, it was the public sector that was bearing a huge burden, that bore the whole burden, in fact, in the initial months. And slowly the private sector started coming in. But I think that's another flip side that, that COVID has brought. I mean, it's told us that at the end of the day, it's the public health sector that you can completely rely on, and the public health sector has to deliver. So I think that is another thing. The influence of corporate sector, frankly, if you ask me, has come down a bit compared to, as a health reporter, the kind of overtures you have from private hospitals during normal times versus COVID times has come down a bit. And we are writing stories on how exorbitantly some of these private hospitals are charging. I mean, across the board, all newspapers are doing it, all channels are doing it. And that's something, we might not have been able to, because there is a lot of public anger. Basically, a newspaper reflects public opinion at some level. There is a lot of public anger, and therefore we feel the need to do these stories that certainly won't keep corporates happy. So I think post-COVID, the influence, the overwhelming influence of the corporate sector has come down. There's still, the other thing is, with all these drugs being on trial, there is a lot of pharma companies that come in. But if you play by your old rules, like if you play by, give me your RCT, show me data from your RCT, show me data from whatever trial you did, show me raw data, it's possible to sort of keep these people at bay. Sometimes you have to write because it's news. I mean, if I don't want to name the corporates, but then, we've carried news because it's news, and you can also do stories criticizing the road. So that's it, I guess. It's come down,
Yeah, slightly switching gears right now. I think you already spoke about it, but yet there is another question on the fall in ad revenue and how that's impacting, the overall economy, so to say. Not just, I mean, is that kind of a sign of falling economy?
Yeah, I would think so. We are yeah, so I think Spurti is frozen, or
yeah, it seems that way.
All right, okay. Yeah, so it does seem that way, but because if you look at ad revenues as such that go into newspapers or channels,
That is journalism
Sorry. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah. So if you look at ad spend, usually the ad spend is the least priority for advertisers. I mean, and for companies, as in, if you have a crisis, the first to go will be the ad revenue. It's also essential for companies to, market their product. But if they have to cut corners, then ads are where they will cut corners. And dwindling ad revenues is certainly a sign of the times that we live in. Um, there is a deep economic impact. It's unprecedented economic impact of COVID on our society, on our economy, and I think we have to recognize that, and more than that, the government has to recognize a great deal of displacement has happened in terms of migrant workers going home. And I think, and to be charitable, we didn't know the right thing to do at that point of time. So we have made some mistakes in the past. But the thing is to recognize our mistakes from the past and make sure that we don't repeat them again. And part of that would be to take care of our large migrant workforce, to take care of the vulnerable, and to take care of people who are daily
Ramya,
wage earners. Yeah. Yeah. So
sorry, I think it was my internet.
yeah. So yes, we have a crisis and we have to address it. I think that's very important.
The other question, I don't know if you have time. We are already at 6:26. If you have like 10 more minutes, I think the other big elephant in the room is fake news.
Yeah.
You did mention that how exhaustive it is to kind of fight all this, and of course with ISRC we also have a big content body of content that we have created as hoax busting to say what is scientifically valid, what is not, and how much of an evidence we have in each of these claims. So that's a big exercise for us too, and it's definitely exhausting. I agree with you on that. Given that, right, given that there is so much circulating around on WhatsApp, that's definitely one of the big uh, what do you say, some kind of generator of fake news, so to say.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing also that's concerning with the media, I'm not obviously pointing out that it's the Hindu or whatever, but generally when you look into the media scene, and especially TV, which is running on this wheel all the time, you have a lot of claims that are put out there, and pseudoscience and science kind of takes the same pedestal, same level of talking about, or putting it out to the public. So given that, what do you think is the role of journalism, so to say, and especially journalists in kind of beating this, and what should they do ethically to kind of inform the public rather than misguide them?
Yeah. So, like, we all agree that it is very exhausting to bust fake news, and the time and effort and energy in just saying no, this doesn't exist is huge. But it's important for journalists to do it because, simple things. There was some fake, if you do this, I mean, it was bizarre to listen to. The other day, my mom was saying that, this, I read this somewhere. Like, where did you read it? WhatsApp, some aunt sent it to her. And I'm like, you're countering my science with WhatsApp. How can you do that? But that's true because people have access. Not everyone wants to read a publication in the Lancet to clarify for themselves. So I think it's very important for journalists to do it because whether we like it or not, we read the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine and the BMJ, and we have to. I think it's very, very important, especially now, to clarify fake news as and when possible to readers. Even if you've not carried the fake news in the first place, I think it's a lot of information that's essential for readers and for audiences. Yeah, I think so. And again, you bust it scientifically. There's no need to take pangas with anyone, on this. But this is science and this is non-science. This is nonsense. It's possible to say that, and I think we have to say that as well.
Yeah, and a related episode we had was with claims made by Patanjali in terms of, saying that their medicine works without giving a particular evidence in terms of RCTs or whatever they claim to have done, and the data is never published, or it's never even made public, so to say. So with that, with so-called big businesses, so promoting things like Ayurveda, and now you have n number of immunity boosters out there. And if you pick everything, obviously it's going to be like a marathon to kind of say, okay, this is not working, this is not working, XYZ. What do you think is the role of journalism, so to say, to inculcate that scientific temper in people's mind, so people will be able to choose, and kind of analyze the information that they're thrown at, rather than believing WhatsApp forwards or anti gossips and things like that?
Yeah. So this is a toughie. um, I think people in general look for uh, are willing to believe what they hear or see that will tell them that things are fine when things are actually not fine. And they're also looking for bad news when it happens to others, willing to believe bad news when it happens to others. That's why this WhatsApp is, is like a raging fire. How do you put it out? What also happens is when the state itself, the state as an authority, begins endorsing uh, these fantastic cures. It is practically magical cures. It, as the act goes, magical cures and remedies. With, I think, with the last Patanjali Ayurveda incident, the state, the central government responded nearly instantaneously with a rebuttal. And I think that was admirable. I was quite surprised that happened. There was a press release saying, yeah, we don't know what this is about, and you can't claim that coronal cures. And then they had to backtrack. They said a lot of other things later. But similarly in Tamil Nadu, there is this belief that a Siddha preparation, Kavasura Kudineer, has a lot of impact on people with COVID. It's being tried in hospitals. In fact, PTI, I think, did a story maybe a month ago saying that the Siddha doctors want the government to turn over all their patients to them so that they will cure everyone with COVID. It becomes really difficult if the state is not questioning, if the state does not ask for validation, for scientific validation. There are a few scientists I know who are working, straddling both fields, trying to work on adapting. So basically, when you speak to Siddha practitioners, you speak to Ayurveds, or you speak to Unani practitioners, the thing they say is, Western science, they have different methods of validation, and we have different techniques of production. We don't use, compounds and things like that. We use natural preparations. How do we import a Western, validation technique to methods that are completely different? But whatever be your method, I think it's important to prove beyond doubt that your medicine works, not on the basis of how how one individual or two individuals respond to it, but how a varied population. Because what is an RCT? It just ensures that this factor is responsible for this consequence. If you're able to prove that coronal, given everything else is the same for all participants of the trial, is the reason why some people recovered, then that's the science for you. So I think the need, as Indian, traditional systems of medicine, there's probably not been a culture of scientific validation among those systems of medicine. But I think it's important to do it now, to start doing it now, because like the Madras High Court did say in its judgment last week, that you don't need to ignore certain systems of medicine, but explore it, and do it scientifically in order that we make sure that if there are some benefits to be derived from there, then let us do that too. Let us bring the entire armamentarium into the war. Let's fight this with everything we have, but let's do it scientifically. So I think I think the state has to have that mindset as well. Unless the state also insists on that, I think it'll be difficult to push this agenda. But this is the time. This is the ripe time is ripe. If you don't do it now, when will you do it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So,
so Ramya, I think we are 5 minutes over than what we said we will end at. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, and for giving us an elaborate view of what happens in the newsroom, inside people's head in the newsroom, and how COVID-19 has changed a lot for all of us, and especially for journalists. There is also, I just wanted to mention this. I'm sure you know as well that journalists are one of the most burned out people right now because of the workload that's happening with everything that's changing so fast. So I wish there is some recourse, so to say, kind of over time, where there is some healing happening. So with that note, I just want to thank you again for giving your time and agreeing to speak to us. It was lovely speaking to you. And for the viewers, I just want to mention again that ISRC has a big body of work with respect to myth busting, with respect to commonly asked questions and answers. And the scientists at ISRC are very open to talking to not just journalists but also public. So this is an initiative for us to talk to public, in so to say. And we are having regular webinars in regional languages as well, so that the public as well is kind of informed about the science breakthroughs that's happening and the fast changing science around us. There is also press releases for you, Ramya, for journalists, and maybe you can just spread the word out to your circles that ISRC has bi-weekly press releases that we send out, either on a particular statement that was made or on a particular, big breakthrough in science, so to say, or on the material that we ourselves are creating. So any of that is useful to any of you. You're free to use it and, get back to us if you want more things like that. So please do check it out. Not just Ramya, but everybody who's on the call, feel free to check it out. With that note, thank you so much. And for the viewers, we are going to have another exciting session next Sunday and hope to see you there too. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
thank you so much. Thank you for having me over. Bye.
Thank you, Ramya.
Bye.